Let me pass this.
Cookies and coffee.
Cookies and juice. And if you would like to be on our email list and get notice of upcoming events, I'm passing this around, and you can give me your name and email address. Most of you are on the list already. Well, we've gathered here today to talk about what to do about the energy unleashed by this guy and his campaign, Bernie Sanders' campaign. Really an unexpected amount of energy has been generated. Most famously young people, but really all ages. The question before us now is what to do with that energy. And there are various ideas, various proposals, various options, not necessarily exclusive of one another. Some say we've got to put our energy into preventing a Trump presidency, which means working for, or at least voting for, Hillary. There are others who say, well, we've got to focus on maintaining a critical presence behind the issues that Bernie raised. And make sure that there's street heat to the candidate and to the next president, whoever it is, to promote a progressive agenda. There are others who say, enough of this two-party electoral system, we need a third alternative. We need a third party, and people put their energy there. And there are others who say, oh, really, in the long run, we've got to go beyond electoral politics. We've got to build an institutional structure for a progressive movement, and working locally in various ways, including working for progressive candidates for Congress, so that in 2018 we'll have a new Congress, but also building other kinds of locally based institutions, so that the progressive movement will have the strength within civil society. Well, those are some of the options, and I'm sure there are others that will come to light in our discussion. To kick the discussion off, we have three presenters who've each been asked to give their elevator talk. What they would say if they were in an elevator with someone and just had very limited time to put their ideas out. So we have three elevator talks, and after that we open it up to all of you. This is a forum, and we encourage participation from everyone. Not long speeches, but hopefully dialogue, not confrontation. Hopefully we don't need to be at each other's throats, even though there might be differences in perspectives, but we need to respect those differences and figure out how progressives can work together or in parallel ways to promote a progressive agenda for the country. So, without any further ado, who wants to go first? Peter? I'll go first. Okay, Peter, okay? Weisberg first, and Nellie Bailey will be second, and Gregory Diamant third. Okay? Thanks.
Peter, could you sit in the middle there, or you aren't? Yeah, please, if you can. Or would, I don't know. Peter doesn't like crowded airplane seats.
Absolutely. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Glad you're all here. And really, it is true. What we really want to do is stimulate discussion amongst everybody that's here. So all the little speeches that we have, I think, are going to be quite short. And I read typically. I don't stand up or read. So I'll go ahead and read what I've put down here. I used to tell my son that the dominant culture is like a giant amoeba whose pseudopods envelop and dilute everything in its path, incorporating the frivolous and discarding the essence. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about the importance of mass social movements that work outside the sphere of party politics. There's an expression amongst some progressives that once a movement is absorbed by the Democratic Party, it's destined to die. History shows this to be true only part of the time. The suffrage and civil rights movements are examples where massive grassroots movements started outside the party system and applied incredible amounts of pressure and eventually entered the political sphere with successful conclusions, to some extent. As with many social movements, these are examples where the goal was to open up the dominant system and make it more accessible to people who had been excluded from the process. But what happens if the goal of the movement is focused on creating an alternative to the dominant system? Did Bernie Sanders' revolution challenge the existing system? For many progressives, Bernie's campaign represented the first time in a long time where voting became more than an exercise in holding your nose and voting for the lesser of two evils. The grassroots movement that drove Bernie's success pushed Hillary to the left, at least in her rhetoric and the DNC platform. I suspect this will be short-lived, as the convention campaign that has gone on since then has been driven by uber-American and ultra-militant language. Now that a significant part of Bernie's army has been absorbed into the Stop Trump at All Costs movement, the Democrats can get back to business as usual as billionaires line up behind Hillary, and I'd be surprised if anyone here today believes that that doesn't come at a high price. The amoeba has ingested a large part of the movement, diluted the message so that it's palatable to the dominant power in the party, and shifted back to the right. Occupy Wall Street, like the Zapatista movement, was reluctant to align itself with any political party or electoral process. They both take the position that the system itself is corrupt, and by remaining outside its boundaries, they can have greater influence in those areas most important to their constituencies. The Zapatistas say that democracy is the exercise of power by the people all the time and in all places. For Occupy Wall Street, only by maintaining a distance from the corporate-controlled parties can they change the underlying power structure. And I'm going to use climate change as an example that represents a clear arena where only independent outside pressure can achieve the dramatic system changes that are needed to avoid an environmental holocaust. The capitalist economic system, its political parties, and its cheerleaders are at the core of the problem. They are incapable of making decisions that impact their power, profits, and philosophy. And that is exactly what needs to be done in terms of climate change. Donnie thinks climate change is a hoax. Okay? Hillary believes her incremental approach to solving the climate crisis is sufficient and practical. Her pragmatism is actually an acknowledgement that her backers are not on board for making the immediate and hard choices. Hello? We are past the point of making polite requests for the tiger to change its stripes. We, the people's movement, must demand steps are taken to ensure there is a sustainable future for our children's children. I also believe that in the overall movement strategy, there will be need for a militant wing, because those in power will not give up their power without a fight, which will include repressive policies and action. I think it's important that progressives do not take a uniform condemnation of all violence. Nonviolence has its limitations, and we will need all the tools at our disposal to make difficult, far-reaching changes. I also understand that a significant part of the movement will believe in and participate in party politics as usual and the electoral process. It's the job of grassroots independent movements, as well as the scientific community, to help energize and educate this segment of civil society, move it forward to a clearer understanding of the magnitude of the problem before us and the real solutions, independent of protecting corporate profits. The current political system must be cracked open and either be forced to change or get out of the way of real solutions. Power must be confronted and dismantled. That will only happen with a grassroots social movement pushing from outside the box. Thank you.
Okay. Nellie Bailey, next.
Well, thank you very much. I must admit, I was under the impression that I was to make a very brief presentation of 3 or 4 minutes, and therefore I did not prepare a text. And of course, it's much better when you can follow your thoughts as you have laid them out. So I do ask that you bear with me while I sort of summons up the points in my mind that I wanted to make here today. I do believe that it is significant that we are witnessing the implosion of the duopoly system here in this country, in both the Republican and the Democratic Party, and the fracturing of those elements within this duopoly system has helped to coalesce this movement that became part of the Bernie Sanders campaign. I do not believe that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, was a socialist, or even understands what a socialist is. And that is the means of productions in the hands of the people. I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think he represents a reformist movement within the Democratic Party, just as Jesse Jackson did in his first presidential campaign. We have to move the Democratic Party to the left, more of a people-centered agenda. Bill Clinton was elected president, and he attacked, or rather assaulted that agenda of Jesse Jackson by moving the Democratic Party to a centrist position. And part of his achievement of this agenda was to attack black people, as he did with Sister Souljah, a black activist, as he did with his legislation of 3 strikes, you're out, as he did with welfare reform, as he did with a series of laws that led to the implosion of mass incarceration, and that is mass incarceration of young black men. We can lay that at the feet of the Clinton administration. I do believe, with as my colleague here, that we must build movements outside the electoral arena, that is outside the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton, from my political perspective, is no different than that of Donald Trump. There may be some nuances of the differences, but basically it's the same. And what I find unsettling is the fact that in critiquing Donald Trump here around this propaganda, media-inspired propaganda of him being the ultimate boogeyman, does not serve our analysis, a critical analysis in terms of looking at U.S. foreign policy. And on that, I would like to say very briefly, since deindustrialization in this country, and that industry has moved to the global south, which in a sense, in my opinion, has shifted and is part of the unintended consequences of the balance of power somewhat. I hope you can follow me on that. because finance capital here is in a crisis. It is in a deadly crisis. As we saw in the 2008 financial collapse, we're going to see another collapse. And I think our foreign policy, in part, is being guided by the fact that we are no longer the masters of production and industry in this country, and our main source of capital in this country is that of the military. And the military might of the U.S. trumps that, in their mind, of industry. Hence the pivot toward Russia, hence the pivot toward China. Even though China holds a $1 trillion deficit of the U.S. And this crisis of capital in terms of its agenda of wars to stay afloat economically is one that Hillary Clinton will carry forth with more venom, with more strategic targeting than anything that Donald Trump can even dream of. With respect to third-party movements, which I think is an adjunct to movements, grassroots movements, independent of the electoral process, is one that we have to look at beyond this election, because change is slow, it is forever evolving, it will not remain the same, but we have to have a starting point other than hold your nose and vote for a Democrat when we know that we are going to get the same results. And in my opinion, given this critical juncture of U.S. history, of U.S. imperialism, we will fare much worse under Hillary Clinton than, I guess, the unknown quantity of a Donald Trump. And I hope it was not too convoluted and I wasn't all over the place, but I hope that you were able to grasp the essence of my point here. And briefly again, break with the Democratic Party. We have to look beyond the electoral arena. We have to build movements. We have to look for the coalescence of those movements, as we've seen in the environmental sector, as we've seen in other sectors. And we have to look at world affairs and global politics and our critique of who would be the best or worst of these candidates. And if you are a leftist, if you are a progressive, if you are a Marxist, there is not a moral equivalent of the lesser of the two evils. I mean, was Eichmann more evil than Hitler? I mean, you can't, I mean, there are no moral equations here. We can't move forward as the left with this aberration, if you will. It does not serve us. It does not serve a movement. It does not serve our children or any other future generations.
Thank you, Nellie. It wouldn't have been any better if you could.
I think so. My thoughts were all over the place, but thank you for bearing through this with me.
Now, Gregory, Diamant.
I have written. So bear with me for that. Perhaps a very good word to describe the mental state many of us progressives currently find ourselves in is uncertainty. We are pinned between Scylla and Charybdis and lured by a siren song to what? What is to be done? Electoral politics is a great enticement, especially the big one, the presidency. Clinton or Trump, perhaps Jill Stein or Gary Johnson. What about the Congress? Who will shape the Supreme Court and thus its rulings over the next several years? Can progressives take over state houses and governorships? There will be a census in 2020, and therefore, post-census, State politicians will be instrumental in shaping electoral districts and thus create an opening to roll back some egregious gerrymandering. What alternative political and economic structures must we create to confront climate disruption, institutional and instrumental racism, increasing inequality and debt slavery on the personal and political levels? How do we shape the education system for future generations? Who will educate the educators? Does the word citizen need to be redefined? Just asking these questions, and many more, must give us pause. What a challenge we have ahead of us. But asking these questions and discussing them is a first step toward taking action. We are not going to have all the answers beforehand, but action plans, probably drawn in pencil with many erasers at our fingertips, will have to be drawn up. In 3 months, the elections of 2016 will be behind us, but the problems and questions will remain, complicated by a new political reality. We cannot rest. We will have to struggle on many fronts to create a mass movement for change, one that is bigger than the civil rights movement or the anti-Vietnam War. The challenges now are greater than they were 50 or 60 years ago. The forces of the right are stronger and the left is weaker. The 500-pound elephant in the room is climate disruption, and in one way or another will of necessity inform all of our struggles for change. New threatening diseases have and will rear their heads to challenge our existence, and we will have to confront the conventional platitudes of our politicians and the media who try to convince us that these are natural disasters. They most certainly are not just that. They are political manifestations of our political economic system, the rule of capital, as our slums, and the way we create and consume our food and dispose of our waste. In the US and Europe, we see the beginnings of the collapse of the political center and the migration to the extremes. A new energy is reflective of this political change, and a goal of progressives is to harness that energy to a transformative project. There is a threatening rise of national internationalism, and only the creation of a progressive international can counter that. The building of solidarity within our nation, society, through our struggles for a better world, and the creation of new political economic formations and relations must be allied with a solidarity that is also outward-looking. Underpinning all of the confusions and challenges we are facing is the increasingly poor state of the capitalist economy. Long-term stagnation in the US, Europe, and Japan that increased financialization has masked for the past 40 years can no longer conceal the tremendous transfer of wealth from the base of society, the 99%, to the cloud dwellers, the 1%. However, the political interpretation of this increasing inequality and resulting poor quality of life has been more successfully communicated by the forces of reaction than by progressives, stimulating the growing popularity of authoritarian figures such as Trump, Le Pen in France, and Orban in Hungary. So what is to be done? Forums like this are the first baby steps. Listen, learn, analyze, and communicate. Struggle for justice wherever you are, but have a vision of the future. Don't be afraid of the word utopia. Embrace it, for it is not enough to be against the bad things of the world, but we need to show what we are for. What kind of a world do we want, and how will we create it? As stated earlier, we will need to have our pencils to hand with large erasers by our sides. Remember that all struggles against injustices must include a glimpse of the future. We have to express that vision in who we are and how we relate to others. All too often, in the heat of the moment, we lose sight of that crucial point. By showing what we are struggling for, we could bring unexpected allies and supporters to our side. Creating the world we want for our children and our grandchildren begins with all of us. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for those introductions to the topic for us to discuss today. And I'm sure that there are other points of view that you have. And we want all points of view to be, and to have space in this discussion. So let's have an initial show of hands of who wants to speak. Okay, well, that's good. That's good. Well, we'll start here. Just go around the room.
Well, one thing that I think is really important, and
I can't hear.
We can't hear him.
one thing that I think is really important, and I did not hear any mention of, is getting money out of politics. We can't expect anything to change in politics anywhere, from Washington, on down, until we get money out of politics. And that's.
Okay.
I was very appreciative of all of your points of view, and I found things to relate to in all three. I also found things that I took exception to, probably, and at least, well, all three in terms of pragmatic action and immediate action. I probably am not pro the inclination toward any sort of violence, especially when you're going up against gun-toting, Duck Dynasty watching folks. I don't think that's going to put us. I still prefer that using one's intellect is going to be the higher ground that I prefer to follow. I took a little bit of exception with I do believe that a lot of the mass incarceration of the blacks can be laid at the foot of Clinton, but I also think prior to that was during the drug enforcement, drug war under Reagan, that as much or more can be done. So I have a bit of a problem with saying, Clinton is the Eichmann to Trump's Hitler, and then saying on the other hand that, but going with the unknown was acceptable.
But I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. My comparison was not that of Clinton. My comparison was the worst of the two evils.
Right.
It was within that framework that I was addressing this, not with Clinton himself. So that was not what
Yeah, no, I
said.
understand. I'm talking about actually Hillary at this
Okay.
point. Because I don't think I could tolerate allowing a Trump presidency. So, what I'm looking for, and I loved your sort of overview and everything we need to do and the ground movement. But pragmatically, what do we do in this election, specifically? Where do we cast our vote while moving these grassroots movements, and what can we do to keep the agenda focused on staying to the left and the platform and not letting it recede back to the right? So I guess I'm looking for input from everyone on very, very step-by-step pragmatic actions between now and November, and then during the next 4 years, regardless of who's at the helm, what actions do we take more specifically to doing what we need to do to keep the platform focused to the left in the progressive movement?
All right, this gentleman here.
Well, I guess I have to start out and say that I am a real advocate of the entrepreneurial and capitalist system, very much so, as it's supposed to be implemented. And that gives an example of what I consider the really essence of that and its success is some of the microloan programs in Africa, where loans of as little as $100 can finance a person, many of them women, in establishing their own business, which then grows and becomes more successful. Or again, a loan as little as $100 or even less that can help a farmer get improved seed, perhaps do a little bit of irrigation to improve his crop yields and make him more successful and more independent. that is the kind of capitalism that I think is what is needed, and some of the programs that are needed within the U.S. also to reestablish that kind of thing, which I think is part of the American exceptionalism, where there is no class system, where one who is born at whatever level is able to, through his own efforts, improve himself and become successful and make enough money to join the middle class and live a good life. In figuring all this out, I have been struck by several things. One is the great number of issues that are really fundamental issues where Bernie and Trump have been absolutely on the same page. And I think it's clear that our current system of electing congressmen and senators, even presidents, is flat broken. It just isn't working the way it was envisioned by our founders and as embodied by the Constitution. And the Constitution has been so worked and trod upon from Wilson on down that the hope of ever going back to the original intent, I think, is just impossible. But we can corral where we're at a whole lot more. And so the movement that you guys are, and I say you guys because I'm new to this and I need some help in understanding definitions. One of which is, what is the progressive agenda? There have been a number of terms thrown out, and they have become like platitudes. And Hillary uses them, even the Republicans use them at times. And they have lost their meaning. And throughout the political decades, it seems to be a real tactic of the political class that they take a term and then they pervert it and use it for their own particular gain. So they have this wave of things before people realize that the term no longer means what they thought it meant. And so I would appreciate a little bit more definition of what progressive and the progressive agenda really is. Just another thing that we've talked about Jesse Jackson and some of the black movement, and we have examples of many things, programs going way back. The War on Poverty of Johnson kind of comes to mind, where we spent trillions of dollars and people don't seem to really improve themselves. And one thing that has struck me in my business career, and I've had a very successful business career as an engineer, winding up chief engineer of a major division of an international corporation, then moving over to corporate level as director of advanced electronics for the corporation, then being recruited from that by that company, by Motorola to help them start a new business, wound up director of sales and marketing for that company. Then later did a electronic startup and was VP of sales for that. Was very successful. And then after the venture capitalists funding that, wanted to collect their money after that. I didn't want to stay with that, so then I started my own business, turning a hobby into a furniture manufacturing business. And that was also very successful. So I've been a business owner and up through the ladders in major corporations, and both an engineering and a sales and marketing position and a management position. But one thing that has struck me in all of this, I've interacted with many levels of people, types of people, really all over the world. And one thing that has struck me is that blacks that have grown up in the U.S. seem to have a mentality that is victim. Other blacks that I've run into whether they're from the Bahamas, from
Okay.
I voted for Bernie, and I was very happy with the issues that he raised and how they resonated with young people, because I think young people had been silent. But I also like to look at past elections. I like history and things like that. So I kind of go back to the Humphrey-Nixon election. When Johnson had been successful in advancing issues such as voter representation, civil rights, and different things like that. And then his nemesis, of course, was the Vietnam War, and we were all alive at that time. And we all turned against Johnson, I'm sure. And we didn't hold our nose. Many of us voted for third-party candidates in that election. And that was ceded to Nixon. And that was the beginning of issues that really impacted on the United States. I think that brought about people trying to make it into less of a democratic system and much more into a very proto-capitalist type state. We see the decline of the middle class after that. We see decline in wages. We see all those things going on, and that carried on right into the Reagan administration and so forth. When I see somebody like Trump, I say to myself, well, the man is an absolute demagogue. He's a racist, a bigot, a liar. He's a sociopath. And I look at the election in 1932 in Germany when Hitler was running against Hindenburg, and Hitler lost. But they managed to get into the parliament and take it over, and then it took another 5 or 6 years to Nazify that nation and turn it into a mad dog that unleashed itself in Spain and eventually in Poland and all the rest of Europe. So I see those shades in Trump. I believe that he's a sociopath, if there ever was one. I have to be practical about the coming election, and obviously in that respect I'm going to vote for Hillary. And what I see is very important here is we may not succeed in dealing with the gerrymandering issue. We may not succeed in some of those things initially, but the Supreme Court is the key. And if we're going to overturn Citizens United, we're going to overturn some of these voter suppression cases that we see that are prevalent. And we see it in North Carolina, we see it in Florida, we see it in Texas, we see it in these states. If we're going to overturn that issue, we have to have judges who are not originalists on this court. We need judges that are going to see the dynamic of American society and how important it is our demography changes, bringing everybody together so that everybody can move forward with positive energies and synergies that will develop in this changing demographic of America. So we need to open the doors. We can't be living back in feudalistic times as some of these originalists on the courts are. Trump will stack it with these type of people. And we'll simply go into a black hole, if not a civil war in the United States. So I see the importance of, number one, defeating him. Hillary has to get in there. Yes, she's going to be tied to Wall Street. Yes, she's going to be tied to these interests that she's there. She's generally had a progressive outlook on many issues all her life, whether it was the speech she gave at Wellesley College, at the commencement ceremony, when she graduated in 1969. Throughout her life, she's been relatively progressive, but she's co-opted out in terms of her affiliations, things like Whitewater, things like her investment in $1,000 it turns out to be $100,000, or whatever the income was that she made from that. You know, these are things that when people are in power, they become arrogant and they forget about rules that other people that aren't in power are bound by. So I do see that problem with Hillary, but the Supreme Court to me is the key going forward, and I have to work for the defeat of Trump, and I'm certainly going to vote for Hillary in this election.
Okay.
Well, two things, maybe even three things. One is I have a feeling I will strongly disagree with you, sir, but I object to your being cut short, because I do think it's important to hear your point of view, because it's going to represent not just yours, but many other people, and it's important to understand before before you disagree. The second thing I was thinking is change can't happen unless you start at the very basics, which of course means education, an opportunity to learn. It means getting people who can't get the vote because it's been stacked against them in terms of identification, mileage, whatever. Fighting to get those people to have a chance to vote, express themselves, and stand up for themselves. Otherwise, people who are incarcerated should have an opportunity to be part of the voting system. If they've been released, they've served their time. And we know that that's another way of keeping a lot of people who are poor and downtrodden. But you just don't know what the problem is if you don't have some perspective, some education, some exposure. And I think a great many of the people who are voting for Trump do not. I think there's a tremendous amount of ignorance that's pushing this movement ahead. So I say attack the ignorance. How do you do that? I guess you'd have to start with making some changes in the school system. If there are textbooks that are not allowed in parts of the West, and Texas and the South and whatnot, there's a target for change right there. Let's start with people having a clear perspective on what all these terms mean and how it affects their well-being. I don't believe people vote against their well-being if they understand what their vote, what direction their vote is going to take them. So I think they're hoodwinked into thinking that this is for their well-being, like so many people who would be against the New Deal if the New Deal were presented today. I just think it's ignorance. And I think it's important to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah, hi. Thanks to all the three presenters. I found each point really interesting. I think the image that really stuck with me was the giant eraser and the pencil, because I have that thing too. Like, what do we do now? What's next? What's next? And what's happening is there's this big uncertainty, and you can't see what's next. So I was thinking about like quantum physics and how when there's a space, it's within the space that possibility happens. And so that's the place we're in now, and it's an uncomfortable place to be. I work a lot with the I Ching, and there's this thing when you throw the I Ching that when you're confused, that's when the answer can come in. It's only through, so we're here in this kind of state of confusion and what happens, and then I keep hearing this music out here that's like kind of distracting in a way, but I keep thinking of then the creative aspect of like, what about the arts, how to bring that in, some creative ways of protest or something, I don't know what that would be, but it just keeps being in my ear. So I feel like the arts, I want that to be part of it. I love the word duopoly, that was really helpful to hear about that. I have a specific question about Dem Exit and how to do it and when to do it in the most kind of effective way. I have a question about forming third parties and how that can become a way, like how and when to vote to do third party, where to go. I've been reading about, Our Revolution, that is a little organization that started, and just different organizations that are beginning. And the one from the senator in Seattle, I've forgotten her name. She has started, and there's a new organization coming under her, and then there's the Sanders Institute. So I have if anybody has specific feedback about where to go in any of those kind of things about what's next, and like, is it independent, is it green? And I'm not, frankly, kind of thinking beyond November. I can't even go there. I know there's ways to analyze what state you vote from, and to see if your state is a swing state, then there might be an issue about voting for Hillary to not have Trump win, but if your state isn't just a swing state, then you can just do down exit and go where you want. So there's a lot of pages to be able to kind of analyze that. My main really passion and concern is for the environment and climate. There's a new field that's burgeoning called eco-psychology, and I'm part of that movement that comes from a depth psychological perspective. And one of my questions is, you know, there are so many activists right now all over the U.S. and some in Mexico too. I love what Center for Global Justice has done with the Zapatista movement, and Mary Watkins. I've done some work at Pacifica, what she's done too with liberation psychology. But one of my questions is, so there are all these young people who are, for example, there's a group of young people right now who are running from North Dakota to Washington to protest. You know, they've restarted that pipeline again. They thought it was defeated, and now it's going again. So they're doing these protests. There are all these little groups everywhere, and they're chaining themselves, you know, to the machines, and really, you know, a lot of them are indigenous and Native American, and some in Canada. So one of my questions is, how can this progressive movement that began with Bernie, and, you know, 65% of the people under 45 voted for Bernie. I mean, this is a young youth movement. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm trying to keep that focus on kind of a longer term, because I find that this present situation so unsettling, and people who are for Trump, and how does that happen? I'm trying to be curious about it rather than judgmental, because there's so many people who are kind of enthusiastic about that candidacy, and have been struggling to not just label it, and kind of as a psychologist to see what is going on and try to understand it, which is really hard to do. And I struggled with the previous commenter, and that I tend to agree about cutting it off and listening, but I also feel like a lot of time is already taken, and so part of me was like, you know, not too much time, and we are here for some more specific questions. So those are some of my thoughts and questions. And thank you.
Okay, I think, James, you were next?
Yeah, as a person with a bachelor's in psychology, I'd be interested in hearing what you think about Trump in that regard, from that point of view. There's been a perfect storm of commentary in at least the left internet lately from psychotherapists who are terrified of Trump. They think he's very unstable, and I think that is more than perhaps almost any other argument, is the strongest argument for voting for the lesser of evils. I think he, more than anyone, might be capable of bringing down a nuclear holocaust or some equivalent of a Third World War and that sort of thing. I'm against the system as it exists now, but I would vote for Hillary just because he is so terrifying. So I'll let it go at that.
Yeah, Jane.
I want to just make a couple of points. And one is, I don't think there's anybody here under 45. And
What are you trying to say?
I'm getting there. And to say that I really think we all are, most of us vote emotionally more than we do rationally. And that includes, I think, Trump supporters are being as angry. I think they probably are, and I can understand why. And I will say that my emotion that inspired me to vote for Bernie is inspiration. Inspiration lifts me up as an emotion. And so I just want to point out that most voters have some component, if not all of that. And I feel when I voted for Bernie, and a lot of my friends were voting for Hillary, I would just like. But what I realized that my emotion of inspiration, and because of the young people being so inspiring, when I voted for Bernie, I felt an allegiance. I would not betray them, and I still will not betray them. We are over 45. It's not our future. It's not our planet. It's theirs. And all I can say is whatever I can do to keep the movement, Bernie or not, he has inspired something. And what I can do, there are a couple of handouts. It's our revolution, or our political revolution now. Brand new Congress is heading for 2018, and I'm just saying that's what I think we can do is, and to realize there is an emotional component to no matter how we may vote rationally. The second thing I want to say is I hate the two-party system, like we probably all do, but this election, Jill Stein and Green Party is not going to win, and I just encourage everybody to vote strategically. If you live in a swing state, yes, vote for Hillary, because I do think Trump's voters are angry, and I understand why they're voting for him, but I truly believe he is unbalanced. And so, but if you live in a safe blue state, or a safe red state like I do, your vote for Hillary is going to be wasted. So don't vote for Hillary when it will be wasted because there's so many millions the other way or that way. And so I live in a red state, so I'm going to vote for Jill Stein and the Green Party. So one can build if you vote strategically, and all your friends to vote strategically. If they live in a swing state, it's wonderful. And if they don't, you can vote for Green Party. So it's not either or. We can be building the Green Party if we live in a safe red or blue state. And at the same time, we can do our best to stop Trump being president, which, I mean, it's insane. We're here in another country, we know all that. Everybody knows that he's unbalanced, okay? Maybe he's not crazy, but he's not temperamentally suitable.
He's a borderline personality, that's what he is.
Well, whatever he is, he's not suitable, okay? He just, like my grandmother would say, he just won't do. So, that's, and the third point I just want to say is, yes, the future, whatever it is local, whether it's third party, the Democratic Party transforming, but everything you need local, including supporting by information, nothing else, public banking. That's, so now I made my point.
George, I referred to the brand new Congress, and she brought some flyers on that, which some of you picked up as you came in. If you didn't and would like that, you can pick those up, or maybe we should pass them around for those.
Yeah, I'm speaking that seriously. If you live in the United States or know somebody back in your local community, brand new Congress is looking for good people, progressive good people, to run for local, national, but don't keep that in mind for yourself or for people you know.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sort of laying it out more. I have to be a logician more by my educational background. Looking for a real strategic plotted approach to what do we do now, what do we do to lean our energies going forward, maintaining the momentum, continuing to be inspired, but using some pragmatic strategy.
I was going to say thank you because so many people say, oh, I have to vote for Hillary now. I say not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right. Florida.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, I appreciate what Dan said when you said, sir, about voting and how to vote and so on and so forth. And I worked for over a year for Bernie, handing out flyers at the metro stop and putting all kinds of stuff on Facebook and so on. And I would like to see that. I would like to see Bernie's movement continue on. And I have actually gone to my Facebook sites and I've changed them so that they say, for example, the San Miguel one now says San Miguel People's Revolution. The one that I had in San Fernando is East San Fernando Revolution, People's Revolution. I think that's really the way that's really kind of like the way to go. We need to keep those people going. If they join the Green Party, fine. If they join Movement for Bernie, which is the one which is coming out of Seattle, that's fine. But keep them from there. There are really two goals, immediate goals. One of them is defeat Trump. That isn't vote for Hillary. It's defeat Trump. So that's one thing that we really need to be doing. And the other thing we need to be doing is using Bernie's platform as kind of like a base, those are the things that we really want. Now, let me give you an example. We go through this election, we come out the other side, and we have a Congress, and let's suppose Hillary's elected. Bernie is going to put in a bill which is going to say bust up the 5 big banks. I guarantee it, he will do that. And some other people like Elizabeth Warren will back it. And what will happen? What will the Bernie people do at that point? How can they make their voices heard? Well, there's one way of doing it, and this is a really simplistic way. I've not seen it done in a really organized way, and I wish somebody would do it. We know that there are a lot of places where you can have petitions of various kinds, but there isn't any organized petition. There should be an organized petition system so that when Bernie puts a legislative thing in that we want, that organization says we're gonna put our votes, our petition speaking in this petition. Now that might be the one at the White House, it might be some other one, but it's going to be very organized. And as soon as people hear about it, they're all going to throw their names in it. Now I've seen that happen. There was one that was done, and within 3 days or 4 days, they had 200,000 people sign up, which is amazing. Well, if we were really organized with all the Bernie people all over the country, we would have 1 million people. But we're not organized, and we don't do it that way. Well, we ought to be doing that kind of thing, because that is a way of speaking as a group, that this is what we want. And I personally, I'm in favor of breaking up the big banks. I'd like to see that as a major issue. I'm also in favor of many of the things that others have spoken, education, et cetera, et cetera. These are all important things, but they're things that are important in the long term. You're not going to get education overnight. You could break up the big banks in a year if you had the right legislation. So you have to pick your fights and try to get it going. But I think we are at I think the Bernie movement was very important. It's the first real thing that has happened since the 60s, and we got to keep it going. Now, all of you are here. You all come from different places. You all have different friends. You can put your voice in with those people and try to get those things going. Now, I don't really know how, in a practical sense, I found when I was working with the Bernie organization, we couldn't even talk to Jeff Weaver, you know who he was. He was the campaign manager. I actually met him in person for about 5 seconds. I had his email. He never responded to anything that I ever sent him. And I thought I had some pretty good ideas for Bernie. None of them were ever picked up. There was no system for people to put their ideas in. And I think that is an important thing, and I hope that is the way that ultimately this thing evolves. We have the one thing that we have right now, which is very different than we had back in the 60s. We have the computer, we have the cell phone, we have various kinds of technology that could help us try to organize. It's usable.
Okay, there's a hand back here. No, okay, there was my hand too, and then we'll, again.
Well, let me respond. Or can we just
Well,
respond?
no, you're part of the forum
Well, yeah,
discussion
but
too. But I wanted to put in a thought as well. Bernie's campaign was not about him getting elected. It was to spark a progressive movement, to change the political culture, a political revolution, you call it. Now, if you look at our political culture, it is one that is very individualistic and very much shaped by consumerism. And I think that, and this is a long run consideration, looking far beyond November. What we need to do, if we're really serious about building a progressive movement, we need to address the political culture that is very anti-civic, where we're supposed to vote for our own interest, right? Rather than for the common good. I mean, the whole idea of democracy was that out of dialogue, debate, discussion, people express their views and come to a common understanding, not of what benefits me, but what benefits us. That kind of sense of being a part of a larger social whole. And having a responsibility as a citizen to act to promote the common good of that social whole. Now that's all very abstract. But if you look at Bernie's platform, and on the back of this T-shirt, we have Bernie's 12-step program. And you'll notice step number 3.
Can't see it.
Yeah.
Step number 3, workers' cooperatives.
Let's not skip climate change
Now, that was not emphasized in the campaign, but I think in the long run, it will be crucial if we really want a political revolution. Rather than microcredits enabling individuals to enter into business, better to have credits for collectives of people forming cooperatives who are entering into business, but as a collectivity where people learn to work with one another to develop a different kind of culture. And I think that that's one of the things that post-election should be high on a progressive agenda, to create some of the kinds of institutions that will transform the way people think, the way they relate to one another, ultimately the way they vote, but that's part of the institutional structure that I think is needed in the long run to really change the country in some fundamental ways. And all of that, of course, is in addition to specific issues like getting money out of politics, and, the Supreme Court, and all of these intermediate goals. Gregory referred to the need to have a vision. We need to look beyond those to have an idea of where we want it to go. What is a progressive agenda? I would maintain that progressive agenda is those policy and institutional changes that empower ordinary people. Cooperatives are an important part of what can promote that. Okay, we'll go around again for those who want to react to what has been said. Well, you weren't one of the initial hands.
I know.
But,
It's okay, do it however you want it.
Yeah, we'll come to you in a minute, but if there are others who want to enter into the discussion first. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of very interesting points, which obviously the people sitting here couldn't address all of them, so I'm so glad that everybody is speaking. I hope almost everybody is speaking and bringing up a lot of points. And though I took a lot of notes, I don't intend to react to all of them. But just, again, some of the more broad brush things that were brought up. The person over there who was talking about psychology, just as an aside, my analysis is that he's a neo-fascist sociopath who also has ADHD. So it's a very dangerous combination. My own personal history.
What Trump needs is not a vote, but a therapist.
There isn't a therapist who can handle it.
It needs to be institutionalized and not.
But from a personal, oh wait.
Okay, now let's avoid side conversations.
So just from a personal point of view, I grew up under the long shadow of Hitler. My family, whose brought were all refugees, mostly out of Berlin. Some of them fought the brown shirts in the streets of Berlin. And when I see Trump, it's impossible for me, and brought up the number of people brought up, the reminder of Hitler and what happened in the 20s and 30s and so forth. And it moves me because of my own, personal feeling and having studied that as well. And having read in German a lot of the Nazi literature and so forth. So when I hear Trump speak, you hear the echoes of a lot of that. It's not the exact same thing. I'm not saying that, but they're tremendous echoes, and all through the authoritarianism, which I mentioned in Europe and so forth, not just Trump. One hears those echoes. So when you were speaking about being logical and what does one do, and I think Georgiana gave some very good examples of things that can be done that are very apropos. But I want to look at it in a bigger kind of strategic picture. I have no brief for Hillary Clinton, so just get that out of the way. But relative to Trump, depending on the stage you're in, I would say yes, vote for her. Why? Not because all things she says are good or because she's some sort of progressive or anything, no. But because her victory, if we do the proper educational work about it and not have any veils or masks in front of our faces, can open up strategic openings for the left and certain battles not to have to be fought. You talked about the Supreme Court. One of the things was, you mentioned, I think, your first comment was Citizens United are trying to limit the amount of money in politics. And absent a Supreme Court, which has, I won't use the word progressive cast, but somewhat of a liberal cast, it'd be very difficult to do that, or to have a movement for a constitutional amendment and so forth. So, and constitutional amendments are fraught with danger. I mean, the Trump people want to have a constitutional amendment to have a federal budget be a balanced budget and flat tax and so forth. So we can, go into that. I don't want to go too much, but we have to look at all of those things tactically and strategically. So the only advantage I see with her, depending on the state that you're in, and I completely agree with what you're saying, would be that there are some openings where there may be some battles that don't have to be fought, or that can be fought where you have an ally, somewhat of an ally on the legal system side. In the electoral arena, let's not just talk about the federal elections, the presidential one, that's how I started off, but local and state, as Irene said about education and textbooks. Running for committees that choose the textbooks, that education committees on local levels are very important. That's when we started. The Tea Party has been successful in doing that. And that was one of the things I said, where the right, where their forces of reaction have been better than us progressives in doing these kinds of things. So the electoral arena is one area of struggle. Don't put all your eggs in that basket. It's the things outside that put the pressure on, which are even more important and climate disruption, which is the term I prefer to use anyway, is, I think, you know, as I said, one of the key issues, and it's going to inform all the struggles. And as Cliff said, the vision of, you know, how we're going to be, who we are, how we relate to one another, what our personal relations are, that comes out of struggle. The political culture doesn't change because of an intellectual effort. It never has and it never will. It's important that it exists, and the right has been able to change the political culture, but it's been able to change it on the base of an economic change that has gone on. And that's been the long-term stagnation of the American and Western economies, which has been going on for many, many years. So, create as one of these. What is the progressive agenda? That's what has to be developed out of it. That's what I was trying to get to. The one thing that I will say that I disagree with you on is you talk about the youth, and I think they are incredibly important. But I don't think the world belongs only to the youth. They also need some of our experience and wisdom of older people, and that history that you mentioned and that other people have talked about as part of a guide. There's a reason why in many cultures elders are venerated. I don't think they should be venerated to the point of that they're the ultimate arbiters of everything. I love youth. I know we have a lot of friends, some of whom, you know, in our 20s and 30s, even though we were older. But I think there is a role for us to play who have those experiences and try and give what we've learned, what lessons we've learned in our experience, and say, here it is, use it as you wish, see if it's valuable or it informs, but that's part of the educational process. So it has to be something that's going on between all of us. Youth are going to be at the forefront. Youth are beautiful in their passion and energy and in their penetrating intelligence, and I love it. But we also need some of the hopeful wisdom that we may have been able to gather in our own struggles, because we've all been part of those struggles, whether it's civil rights or Vietnam War and so forth and so on. And I think that's really important. So now, that's enough.
Okay, if we're going to have a successful second round where everybody who has a chance to say something, you have to be brief.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, first, I'd like to start with your point, which I think is very, very important in how we, the left, at least in New York City, and I think in other states, looked at blue states strategically in garnering ballot status for the Green Party. And New York State was one of them. And we did that around the Cynthia McKinney campaign for presidency, voting for her. And as a practical matter, knowing that the Democratic Party nominee would eventually win, as Hillary did with the Senate and other things. So I think that's very important to acknowledge the strategic importance of voting for an agenda that will help you to achieve this third party movement and third party status. I attended Bernie Sanders' rally in the Bronx. It was incredible. The electrifying energy of a whole cross-section of people, the diversity of people is unlike anything I have seen since the Civil Rights Movement or the anti-war movement. It was Black, Latinos, it was whatever. Now, on the other hand, moving to the psychologists, in terms of the psychological component of voting, my colleagues and I have talked about the black vote. The majority black vote, because it is anti-Republican Party that is viewed as the white man's party, even though when you look at blacks in terms of the black radical tradition, their beliefs, their political perspectives were more in line with Bernie Sanders. There's no doubt about it. But they couldn't break with the Democratic Party because of the fear of the Republican Party and it being a white man's party, and that was their security, even though it was not within their interest in terms of some of the policies or politics of those Republican Party candidates. Secondly, with respect to this gentleman, I'm African American, so I take great exception to what you said. Number one, when we look back at the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education, separate but not equal, that was not a figment of our imagination in terms of victimhood.
I grant you all
That was not that. And then when we move forward in terms of post-World War II and the GI Bill that allowed the white working class to ascend into the middle class through the GI Bill, that was not distributed or did not accommodate black returning veterans as it did white veterans. And we had some of these all-white suburbians, which communities that came about as a result of government funding. We were locked out of that. New York City is one of the most segregated cities in this country. But Peter Cooper Stuyvesant Town, that was built by MetLife, it said openly, the company said openly, no blacks allowed here. When we look at the urban rebellions from the 1960s as a result of police terror and murder that prompted the Kerner Commission under President Johnson, and if you read chapter 16 of the Kerner Commission, when you look at the concept of spatial deconcentration, that is dispersing the black population in the inner cities into the outer communities, outlying communities of these majority cities. Number one, you broke up a key voting block in these inner city that continues under the disguise or under the guise, rather, of gentrification, and it is much more grounded and sanctioned in public policy, not only from a national but a local perspective. In New York City, and very briefly, I see Cliff looking at me, in New York City, we had planned shrinkage, which came out of the Rand Corporation. And you know what they did in planned shrinkage? They withdrew municipal services from Harlem and the Bronx. Municipal services. Garbage collection, they cut down on police patrol, they closed fire stations, subways. It was to decimate those communities, which is what they did. It occurred under the guidance of the housing commissioner, Roger Starr, who said, why don't the black and Puerto Ricans leave New York City and go back to the South, because we no longer have an industrial base here. In other words, they were surplus labor, which they are today. So when I hear, not you, speaking you euphemistically, it's not personal. When I hear this kind of talk, it's like Barack Obama. It's like, in a way, it's like Barack Obama. Why don't you people stop complaining and pull yourself up? That is what he said. Didn't vote for him, would never vote for him, and will never vote for Hillary Clinton. But I do agree that we have to have multiple strategies. There is no one strategy that we should adhere to or to follow, because we have to allow people to be in their comfort zone as they strive collectively and on an individual basis for change, for a better world.
To a more sustainable, equitable world are important. But this pendulum of the crisis of the climate is moving at a rate at this point that needs undivided and massive attention. And if we're not following that crisis and trying to come up with solutions that are long-term and sustainable for the planet. We're not going to have time for any of the other social justice movements that would follow with our children and our children's children. So that's it.
Wow, you ran with pleasure.
Okay.
It wasn't.
You yield your time?
I just want to say, number one, I don't live in the United States anymore, so I've already sort of cast a vote, and economically I've cast a vote also. But secondly, for me, it boils down to two things. I'm very pro-peace and justice, and I'm very pro getting something done about the environment. And for these two things, I am a radical, because I think they are of extreme importance. And I've been very upset that the WikiLeaks came out. No one really cares that our system is corrupt, and does my vote really count? I really don't know. Was Bernie robbed? There's a question about it. So does my vote count? Secondly, there are things going on. If we continue the status quo, Trump's actions and what he says are one thing, but we have people doing things, their actions are things I'm not a promoter of. Drone attacks, the whistleblowers have been hushed, or jailed. We don't get good information, and psychologically, I'm concerned about the American people, because we have this system that plays into this, and these people emerge, and I'm as concerned about the terrorists that just are out on the streets randomly. We've helped to create this, and I think each of us have a responsibility for justice, peace, and for climate. Or what is the world going to be? And for this alone, I really care about the youth. Because I may not experience as much of it as the rest of the people, but for the youth, I really do care. And that's what my concerns are today.
Okay.
I just wanted to, I must time myself. Okay. Peter's amoeba. I think we have to be aware, and I think everybody here is, and that's why I was talking about strategic things. What do we do immediately? What do we do going forward? We can't, just because the vote goes a certain way in November, do what we have done over the past years since the 60s and roll over and give in to the amoeba. It kind of brings me to remembering an old cartoon. Anybody remember Pogo? It was a very famous line, he's met the enemy and he is us. So it's what are we going to do? So yes, what do we do strategically to ward off what we feel is the biggest evil, to stay inspired about what we think we really want to lead for the future, and then what actions are we going to take. So I think things like changing the Congress, looking at these individual movements, protecting your constituency for wherever your heart lies, or yours, is going to be the big thing. Inaction is going to be the biggest downfall of not allowing the platform, regardless of the person at the helm, to continue to have a progressive agenda.
Okay, 2 minutes from,
That's one.
okay.
Sorry for being so long-winded before. I'm still working on definitions and things like that. And one other data point, I went through the Naval Academy, graduated from there, spent time in the Navy. So I'm hung up on definitions and specifics. And what I was working on was a definition of social justice. And the reason I brought up the microloans is because many of those then, as they become more successful, form cooperatives and therefore gain political power and gain economic power in purchasing raw materials and also in marketing their goods and services. But the social justice thing, to me, that means equal opportunity in an equal or a level playing field for whomever, everyone. And that is intimately connected with the revamping of the criminal justice system, which is also screwed up and really fouled up. And so I think those two things are extremely important. We do have to get more people out of the jails. We do have to revamp that so that they aren't in there for stupid things. But on the other hand, you do have to have law and order and people that obey laws. And so, again, I'm searching for a real definition of what criminal or social justice means to the progressive movement.
Yeah, Chris.
I was going to say that I wanted to answer some of the things you said before, but one of the things that is really low right now is economic opportunity in the United States. is behind about 30 or 40 countries, mostly northern countries in Europe and some of the Asian lions. And I think this idea that everyone can turn out to be Jobs or some of these people that, you know, the guy invented Uber and all these things, it's going the wrong way. And cooperativism is really more important than creating new capitalists. To me, that is societal justice, where people, in fact, have the ability to eat. You know, you know, the people in downtown LA, they have, what is it, 20,000 people in LA or something that are living outdoors. And the police are harassing them every day. Every time they get into some sort of shelter, the police get them for sitting on the sidewalk. They get thrown out of the shelter. They have to start all over. That, to me, is societal justice. I mean, New York City, the same thing. One of the biggest issues with the mayors, he said he was going to solve some of the homeless people's problems. And he hasn't. They're worse. And to me, that's social justice. It's not the ability of some guy pulling himself by the bootstraps. I mean, my dad was an engineer, same thing, very successful man. But he always emphasized that engineers had to take some liberal arts courses versus when he went to school, medical doctors did not. And I always hope that people that are in technology and in science can remember some of their required liberal arts courses. And that's what liberal arts is about. It's creating a social conscience, you know.
I've always been of the belief that America is a damaged country. Goes back to things like the Three-Fifths Compromise, you know, where black people were considered property. And to form a union, you had to say, okay, well, are they really humans, or are they 3/5 of the human, or that type of thing? So we've lived with that legacy for a very long time. I think when we came of age in the 60s, we were beginning to address these issues, which were so important. And to me, it sort of fizzled out. And that is really of concern to me, that the same thing might happen with this movement that we see today, which is the best thing that's happened since the 60s as far as I'm concerned. So I think we have to be very aware of these things. To me, I have to be practical. I've had the luxury of living in Massachusetts much of my life. We've had wonderful candidates, and we have 3 or 4 different parties of socialist candidates that we've had. Some of them have been extraordinary. They're highly educated. They work with poor people. They make very little money, and I always vote for those type of people. But we have the luxury of doing that in Massachusetts. I think that this election, I have to make sure Hillary is in there, because I see the Supreme Court as being the ultimate arbiter of how we move forward. If this movement is going to be kept alive, we have to deal with voter suppression, we have to deal with gerrymandering, we have to deal with Citizens United, and we're not going to be able to do it with constitutional amendments. We have to do it through the Supreme Court. Hillary is key to this.
Yes?
I'm just going to reiterate again the climate issue, the environmental issue, because it is such a crisis. Charles Eisenstadt is a really great writer about the environment, and he just published it's like a precursor to his research that's coming out. And he's looking at every single issue that everybody's talked about as a way of working with climate. He's saying everybody do their part and do something. But I still feel there's this urgency about what's happening with our water, what's happening with fossil fuels, divestment of fossil fuels, to the GMO thing with the pesticides and Monsanto, and Hillary's positions on those make her untenable to me as a vote. I don't live in a swing state, so I don't have to worry about that, but I'm gravely concerned with her ties with the petroleum industry and with pesticides and pollution. So I guess my thing would be to say, here we are in San Miguel also, we have water issues here too. Most of us live here. There's a lot going on with that. There's a forum on Saturday, which will be in Spanish, but it's at the Sindicato at 10, from 10 to 12 on Saturday, and it's local issues, mostly environmental issues. So become aware, I'd say, of where your water comes from, what watershed are you in, what's happening with fracking, what's happening with the water, because if we don't have water, there's nothing left, and that's directly related to the petroleum industry, so that's my final.
Okay. Yeah, each person doesn't have to take 2 minutes, but you're allowed, yeah. Did you want to say, react to anything else that's been said already?
Oh, no.
It's pretty much all been said, I think, but, I think a lot of us spend a lot of our time in semi-denial, that we go along day to day doing things, and then we say, oh yes, I know that there's inequality, or the sky is falling one way or another. But I think we need to wean ourselves away from that. That's a kind of luxury these days, because the world, the human race, depends upon our action in the face of what's happening. That's all.
Okay. Michael or others? Okay, well, it's been a very fruitful discussion, and I appreciate the very articulate presentations that so many of you made. It's quite impressive. Take that talent back to your communities, wherever they are, and mobilize people and energize them to stay in the struggle and maintain a progressive movement beyond November. On the climate crisis, of course, everyone is familiar with Naomi Klein. Her book, This Changes Everything, and the film that she and her husband, Ave Lewis, did together by the same title. Well, you'll be happy to know that they will both be here in San Miguel for the Writers' Conference in February. So if you're going to be here in February, you should probably get your tickets now, because it's going to be a sellout.